Hey guys, I am Kristen Howerton and I blog at Rage Against the Minivan.
And I'm Paul Martin, and I blog at Paulosophia.
So we are doing our weekly recap of the election, and we have decided that every week, in addition to talking about the election, we're also going to pick a social issue and talk about that issue from different sides, because as Paul and I are finding in this election, we tend to agree in terms of the candidates more than we disagree, although we know that philosophically at the end of the day, Paul's a Republican and I'm a Democrat, which makes us differ on a lot of social issues. But let's talk about the election really quick.
Yeah, so Trump clinched. I think I've said 100 times on this very cast that he would never get to 1237 and there would be a contested convention, and he has arrived at 1237 and he is the presumptive nominee. Not presumptive, he is going to be the guy.
Yeah. Okay.
Pregnant pause.
Well, I mean, I think we have said all we could say about how we feel about that. I just think it's abhorrent and doesn't speak well of our country or the mentality of its citizens. But
why are so many millions of people not unnerved in the way that millions are? So you and I are clearly with millions of others that are just not we're not just opposed to him for philosophical or ideological reasons. We're think he's aberrant as a candidate. He is absolutely unqualified and in every what's going on?
I really just have to say I think it is a collective ignorance. I can't find another.
So there's ignorance, but what about this idea of the comments he has made, which aren't a matter of opinion?
Right.
You know, women should be treated like shit. At the end of the day, all that matters is a good piece of ass. His profanity. He's clearly a womanizer. He has admitted to it in so many ways over the decades. What about the parents of these Christian kids who for decades have talked about the morals and the values of this nation, who are coming to rallies to bring their children? I know at least one family that brought their children to a Trump rally, and these are evangelical Christian parents. How is it on that level that so many aren't thinking, the whole, sports stars need to be role models? How are so many blind to that?
I don't know. I mean, I don't know. I hope someone will leave a comment and enlighten us, because I really don't know. It makes no sense. It makes me feel very skeptical of, I feel sometimes like people are cloaking other values in their political values. And I think it's kind of fleshing out right now.
Yeah, and this is, I think, an interesting subject, because we do want to shift some of our conversations to social issues, some of which we agree on, others of which we disagree on. But I think this very fact that millions and millions and millions of evangelical Christians, and you and I both consider ourselves Christians for sure, are turning a blind eye, again, to the very core of what bothers them the most about the moral decay in America. They're supporting a man who's had multiple wives and on and on and on, and it makes no sense.
It makes no sense. I completely agree. Yeah, I mean, the guy clearly has a broken moral compass. All right, well.
So someone says, the racist backlash of 8 years of Obama have manifested into a Trump.
I think that's correct. I do think that's correct. I think that we are not a post-racial society, and I think there were many, many Americans who were uncomfortable having a black man in office. And I think that, even some of these people may not be honest with themselves that that's the case, but I think that there's an attempt to dial back the white supremacy in our nation right now. Which, I mean, ironically, I think, as it comes to race, I think that President Obama was incredibly conservative. And I think he had to be, because, anything he did, he was accused of playing the race card. But in an 8-year season, well, 7 so far, but where, race issues have been, really high. He has been, I feel, has really receded on those issues. But yet, he's still seen as
Yeah, I mean, he was no Al Sharpton by any stretch of the imagination.
No.
And even on the Muslim issue, which apparently he is a Muslim.
Right, correct.
In spite of the fact that he's on record of confessing his Christian faith and having his kids baptized in church and getting married in a Christian church, on and on and on.
Yeah.
It took him 7 years to speak at a mosque for the first time. So I mean, he clearly didn't come into his presidency with an Al Sharpton slash, pro-Muslim agenda.
Not at all. Yeah, not at all. All right, so we are going to talk about immigration today. That is our subject du jour. However, I think we may agree more than we disagree. We've not talked about this.
No, we haven't.
I mean, even personally off camera, we've not talked.
No, we haven't.
About
and
this.
one of the fun things about what we do, I think, is there's not a whole lot of prep here. I show up and we start.
No prep.
And so it's really unfiltered.
It is unfiltered, which because we want to model that discourse too. We don't really want to come in here with talking points and notebooks.
Right.
Our
you can turn on CNN or Fox and get that.
Right. Our attempt here is to model how two friends talk about differences, but we'll see. So, share some of your thoughts on immigration or immigration reform.
Well, yeah, and I think I'll be in the minority because I want to go back not necessarily to the contemporary issues, but I think this nation has a very deep problem based on the idea that the United States of America is supposed to be a white nation in the first place. I think what we did with the Native Americans is important.
Yeah.
And so when I talk about immigration, I like to go back 200 plus years.
Okay, but may I say that that does not feel like a very Republican POV.
Yeah, no, I'm a free thinker and everyone knows it, and I like to think based on what I think is true. And what we know is true is that a bunch of white Europeans, Christians, came and slaughtered millions and millions of Native Americans. And so the rhetorical question of whose country is this really, question mark.
Right.
In a practical sense, of course, it is the United States of America, and I'm proud of that, but I'm also not proud of it.
Yeah.
Because of the history of how we started, and then you fast forward into slavery, and then you have civil rights, and we're still dealing with these issues today.
Yeah. And origin stories are important, and that is the origin of our country, and it's not so distant past, even up until Jim Crow.
Yeah.
So.
And then the question also, so when we talk about immigration and Mexicans, we're in Southern California. This was Mexico. Right. And I'm half Mexican, and that could be part of the reason,
I feel like that probably helps skew you a little bit more liberal on this issue. You're half Mexican, you're half Italian, your family is.
Yeah, and in a very mild sense, they were discriminated against, and I talk about this on my blog once in a while. My father was lucky to have light skin. He's a Mexican, he grew up right in this county, but a lot of his friends with darker skin had to be driven 5 miles away to go to the segregated school for dark-skinned kids right in this town.
Wow.
He remembers the no Mexican signs. And so I have trouble.
That's going to shape your views.
Yeah, I think it does.
Yeah. Which is, and I think going back to the immigration issue, it's interesting because you've got Trump who's so anti-immigration, and yet haven't 2 of his wives been immigrants? Ivana and Melania are.
Yeah, but I think the people on Republicans I know are going to say, but it was legal immigration.
Okay.
And that's, and I think many on the right, they think in this remarkably binary way that's so seeped in they're hypocritical in it.
Yeah.
So in other words, they're illegal, and things that are illegal are wrong. Therefore, it's wrong that they're here. They should be deported, which is impossible. But they have their gardener they're paying,
Totally.
$8 an hour.
Totally.
And they go to the restaurants. And so there's a remarkable hypocrisy amongst many who are anti-immigration, because they will pay as little as they can to have their the life
labor
that they're living.
Yeah, I agree. Well, I have to say on the argument of, illegal immigration, and there seems to be this idea from some that you can just simply do it legally. I have a son who was a refugee, and who I had to, just kind of the way that this happened when he came over to the U.S. as a refugee and not an adopted child. So I had to legally immigrate him in the same process anyone else would use. And I am here to tell you, Um, that's not an easy feat. Not at all. It requires a lot of money, a lot of time. It became like a part-time job, and you know, it was rejected. And this is a kid who, like, it's a straight shot. Like, he's living with parents. Like, he kind of has to be immigrated. He's legally, you know, he had those rights. It was a freaking nightmare. And you know, I have friends that I went to high school with. A friend that I went to high school with who whose parents moved over here from Colombia, and she has been attempting to, you know, immigrate, and she's lived here since she was a child, and it just happened for her at age 40. So you know, there's no simple answer, and like, we have to reform the system if we want to expect everyone to do it legally. Then it needs to be a system that people can actually do.
Yeah, and also, just as a matter of fact, folks, it's water under the bridge. There are 12 million undocumented people from south of this border here, and there's nothing we can do about it. There is no button to push. We're not going to round them up, put them, it's not going to happen.
Yeah, it's not.
And the Mexican and people from south of the border are, I hate to put it this crudely, but breeding their way. Look at me. I'm half Mexican, and there are millions upon millions of children being born. Our country's changing, and white Americans will be a minority by 2042, no matter whether Trump gets elected to office or not. And I think there is so much fear and mixed into this conversation that people don't want to talk about.
I think so too, because we both live in a community with a very high percentage of undocumented immigrants. You know, here in Southern California, I know people tend to think Orange County is very white, but in fact, this is a minority majority county. And you know, the local high school that my children will attend is about 75% Mexican. And I feel like, what's everyone afraid of? Like, how is this bothering anyone?
Yeah. And I think it goes to what Pat Buchanan talked about in an interview he did on NPR a few weeks ago, where he said, well, when I was young, you know, things were better, and you know, it was a whiter nation, and I think a lot of these people have thumbs in their mouths. Really, they're whining. Things have changed, times have changed, and there's really nothing we can do about it. And building some big, huge wall, I mean, come on, there are border issues all over the world. And the spirit of wanting something better for your children is something that's within the depth of every parent's heart, and certainly every Republican's parent's heart. And these people coming over the border at the end of the day want something better.
And
who would blame them for it?
That's the American dream. That's what our country was supposed. I mean, this is a nation of immigrants.
Right.
But I guess that only counts for white immigrants. What are we doing?
I don't know what that means.
I don't either. Blah. But what do you think? I mean, what do you think the solution is?
Well, I think the solution is what Congress and especially the Senate has been trying to do for years, which is some kind of comprehensive immigration bill, a path to citizenship, and you know, you're not going to rip, you know, mothers away from their children. And so, what's the solution given the fact that you can't deport 12 million people? And I think you're going to see in the Senate bill, you know, in the bills that are presented by reasonable politicians, not people like Donald Trump that just see things in black and white. And we have to work within that. I don't know specifically, but I just know there has to be a path. You know, if someone's been living here for 15 years, they're paying their taxes, they have their kids in school, they're working and contributing, there needs to be some kind of path.
I agree, and I feel like so much of the criticism of, like, you know, they're coming in here and sponging, like, then make them citizens. Get them on board, and you know. And then they're, you know, paying taxes just like the rest of us. I mean, the system we have currently is that they have to hide. You know, they can't file a tax return. They can't open a bank account. You know, there's all these cash dealings. Like, make them citizens. They can start paying taxes, and you know, I mean, it's really, again, with the hypocrisy, because I feel like people don't want to then have to, This would increase the wage for these people too, because they wouldn't be having to stand outside of Home Depot and take whatever job comes their way because they can't go and apply for a real job.
Yeah. Yeah.
I mean, it would help everyone. Why don't we try to better their homes? Yeah. You keep referring to Latinos and Mexicans as non-whites. Okay. Yeah, they can be white. I mean, the whole race thing is.
Yeah,
so
I have a lot of trouble with the right words when it comes to conversations like this because you have to be precise and.
Well, but when we say, I mean, we could go into like the genetic specifics of race, but generally speaking, as society views people, I think society does not view Mexicans as white.
Right.
I mean, so when we're using those terms, that's really what we're saying is that
Yeah.
there's an othering of Mexican Americans for sure, and they're not seen as white.
And it's murky. I mean, am I white or am I Mexican?
I don't know.
And some would say, well, you seem white, but you're not totally light. You're not blonde-haired. And so, like President Obama, some have said, well, what right does he have to claim to be African American? He's half white.
Well, you listen to NPR, so I feel like you're white. It's a joke. That's murky. But I think society does not see Mexican Americans as white in this country. They're seen as other.
I love that comment. I hate making people feel uncomfortable about race words. Sometimes I feel like there is such, especially amongst people on the left. I was blogging something the other day, and I found myself with sweating, thinking, "Am I offending someone here? Is this the right word? Is this the right?" It's murky. It could be murky.
Well, if you write about race, you will offend someone. And you just have to kind of gird your loins about that. I mean, yes, there's a lot of word policing. And the result is that, I think people get mixed messages like, we need to talk about race. And then you talk about race and it's like, you did it wrong.
Yeah.
So there has to be some patience, I think, when we're talking about race. Because, I mean, if we get stuck with splitting hairs on nomenclature, then we're not having the actual conversations.
And I think my kind of bottom line in this conversation is that, again, times are changing. Mm-hmm. We all have to understand, especially people on the right where I reside, we have to understand that as a matter of fact, times are changing.
Right.
There are more people with darker skin in our country than there was 50 years ago, and that's only increasing. And there's
why, okay.
But why's the problem?
For real though, why do people care?
And I think that's the latent racism that we talk about.
Yeah. Because that, honestly does not bother me at all.
You're, by not virtue of a political ideology, but how you actually live your life, are an outlier. Most people are not adopting white mom, dad, adopting African American kids. I've seen you in venues where you're with people of color, and I think maybe you're more yourself in those venues than you might be in others. And so you don't represent the norm, but I think your question is, I think it points to the fact that there is this latent sense of, angel's food cake, devil's food cake. There is this thing that's been around in our system for decades that says... The colorism.
Yeah. No, I for sure, I definitely agree with that. I just think, I really, truly think anyone who hears that, whites will be a minority within the next 50 years, if you hear that and there is some check for you, you gotta work that out. Whatever is happening there, people need to get that worked out.
Yeah, and the answer certainly is not the KKK and...
Yeah.
And again, you've had first-hand experience at this, but there will be no race war. There will be an alleged race war or some kind of, a Donald Trump who comes to power. But at the end of the day, there is, as a matter of fact, no way that, as Pat Buchanan hopes, we're going to somehow start getting rid of more people with dark skin.
Yeah.
But again, I agree with you. It's tragic that people even think that.
Yeah. But I think a lot of people do. And I think the reality is it does make some people, it does make people uncomfortable because look at Orange County and look at our town right now that we are living in right now. There's massive white flight from the predominantly Mexican schools. The
Yeah.
schools in this town
Yeah.
are either 75% white. No, that's not even true. Like 95% white, or they're 75% Hispanic.
Yeah.
And you know, where we're going to send our kids to middle school and high school, people are like, really? And the subtext is, it's really Mexican. And my answer is, awesome.
Yeah, no, and
Who cares?
I have to confess that I lived in this neighborhood, in this school district, and I put my kids at the local elementary school, of which 70% of the kids were bused in from the part of this town where most is the Mexicans live. And my argument was, more an issue of, if these kids are learning English in fifth grade, kindergarten at 5 years old, how much attention is my kid going to get? And I saw it as a problem, when 10, 15 years ago when I lived here, and I could see how many parents would, in this particular area, you have this beautiful area with a country club right down the street, but the school that's a mile away from here, 70% of the kids are being bussed in, and I can see how some parents would think, what? And is that an issue of race?
Well, I mean, no. I hear what you're saying on the language thing, although I will say my preference would be that they just make all the schools, bilingual. Like, make them all immersion, I mean, I'm not bothered by my kids. And I'm also not one of those people who's like, they're raised to succeed in kindergarten. I think kindergarten is kind of ridiculous. Like, I sort of feel like in kindergarten, if my kid, like, glued things on a paper and learned their letters like I did and sang some songs while the rest of the kids caught up on their English, like, I'm kind of okay with that. But I am definitely in a minority on my views of school. I mean, I feel like we have to talk about
school and
we do. Like, because to me, it's like, let the, Spanish-speaking kids spend kindergarten learning English, let my kids spend kindergarten. I mean, seriously, my kindergarten class, we had a piano in it, and we sang songs, and we colored.
Yeah, you seem like you turned out okay.
I think I did all right.
You learned your A's.
But that's,
ABCs.
that's a bit of a side note, but I don't know. It's interesting.
Yeah, so I think on that level, I could empathize perhaps a bit with parents who, I don't know, for me, hopefully that wasn't racism, because I am half Mexican, but I just thought, really? I don't know. I have to think more about that.
It's not racism, but I would say it's maybe fear-based. And maybe...
Or wanting the best for my kid.
Yeah,
Which I think ultimately, I had a friend who's a professor, and he's on this big board of the University of California, and I asked him once, where would you send your kid to school? I have this choice, the local school with 70% English learners, or this $15,000 a year private school, or we could move to the other area and send them to the white, rich public school. And he said, oh, definitely send them to the local public school with 70% Spanish learners. Diversity is about everything in education. They will learn more in that diverse environment than they will in the little cocoon rich person school.
Well, I agree with that, but most people don't.
Yeah.
As is evidenced by the white flight. Not just in our town, but everywhere. All right, what else is happening with the election? Let's go back to that for a minute. So we've got some email scandal. What's happening? Why is that happening?
This email thing with Hillary, it rears its ugly head every month or two, and apparently there was some report issued by the investigation, I think, of the State Department. I think I'm getting this right, that she knew that this was at risk. There was risk involved. They now know that she knew. She wasn't ignorant that there was a possibility of a security breach, and Trump jumped all over it. And it's going to continue to dog her in the months ahead.
It's interesting because I think Sanders is really not touching that, which I think speaks to his character, because he could jump on that if he wanted to.
Yeah.
And then we've got, California coming up, and it's looking to be anyone's game in terms of Sanders versus Clinton in California.
Right. They still say, in terms of delegates, there's no way he's going to reach the delegates, but this guy will not go away.
Yeah.
And if you're Hillary, you just have to be so frustrated, right? Because 8 years ago, she was, the shoo-in. Her approval rating was something like 65% after she left the Senate, and this guy named Barack Obama comes along, freshman senator from Illinois, and now you have, he's not going to steal it from her, but he has stole so much of the momentum, that she wanted.
Yeah.
And I think what will happen is she'll get the delegates, and then Bernie, will come behind her with his full support. And then I think Trump will have something to worry about. Right now, in the national polls, Trump and Hillary are, it's kind of a flip of the coin.
Week for humanity. All right, well, that's it for this week. We will put this up on our blogs, and really sincerely would love to hear your comments, particularly on the issue of immigration.
For
and
sure.
We will be back next week.
See you then.